Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask, and he will tell you the truth. Oscar Wilde. In a hidden valley where no map dares to guide you, there's a place untouched by time. A place where identities bloom like poisonous flowers, and the echoes of ancient selves still whisper beneath the leaves. This is the Garden of Echoes. Each path here twists. Each statue gazes with hollow eyes. Every echo is a former version of someone who tried to become something more or less. Some succeeded. Others were buried beneath their own inventions. This is not a garden for the weak. This is where power is born from silence, where identity is not found but constructed, where the self is not a gift but a weapon, forged deliberately, ruthlessly, and with vision. This is the essence of Law 25. Recreate yourself. Do not accept the roles that society foists on you. Recreate yourself by forging a new identity, one that commands attention and never bores the audience. Robert Greene. From the moment you enter the world, forces begin to shape you. Parents, culture, teachers, enemies. They hand you masks and names, rules and limits. They tell you what to be, and you believe them. But power does not reside in those who accept. Power is with those who rewrite. The powerful do not ask, "Who am I?" They ask, "What do I wish to become?" They do not look in the mirror for answers. They build a new mirror, one that reflects the self they have chosen. And when it shatters, they build again. This is not narcissism, it is strategy. Power requires performance, reinvention, seduction. To remain still is to rot. To refuse reinvention is to be forgotten. Those who fail to adapt become relics, echoes without form, faded, pitiful ghosts in the garden. But those who dare to sculpt themselves again and again become living myths. And so, we begin our descent into this garden. We will walk down 3 ancient paths. One of emperors, one of artists, and one of warriors. Each shows a man who reshaped himself not to survive, but to dominate. Some played the role so well they became the role. Others lost themselves in the illusion, but all of them understood one thing: the self is not sacred, it is a tool. Now follow me. The statues are waking. The garden is listening. And the first gate opens with a name: Julius Caesar. The garden shifts. The gravel beneath your feet turns to marble. Vines crawl up the pillars of a crumbling colonnade. Statues of gods, Venus, Mars, Mercury, watch from the shadows, half erased by time. A lone figure appears ahead, draped in crimson, a laurel crown catching the last light of a fading sun. You have found Julius Caesar. But before the titles, before the assassins, before Veni Vidi Vici, he was only a name among names, a minor patrician, an ambitious young man in the decaying corpse of the Roman Republic. Rome had grown old, its nobility fat with comfort, its politics poisoned by tradition. Power lived not in ideas, but in appearances, not in truth, but performance. Caesar understood this before anyone else. He was born into the Dans Julia, an aristocratic family that traced its mythic ancestry to the goddess Venus herself. But lineage meant little when your coffers were empty. Caesar's early years were not marked by luxury, but by danger and displacement. Sulla's dictatorship forced him into hiding. His name, once noble, now invited death. Most men would have faded into exile. Caesar used the chaos as clay. When he returned to Rome, it was not as the same man. He had crafted a new face, one that could seduce the mob, disarm the Senate, and command legions. He began with his image. He was always clean-shaven, always cloaked in immaculate robes. He paid attention to the tilt of his head, the way his toga flowed behind him, the manner of his walk. Every appearance was theater. He understood the Roman taste for spectacle. Caesar made his life a spectacle. Even his weakness, his epileptic seizures, became part of the myth. He allowed rumors to swell that the gods had touched him, that his condition was a divine signal, that he was marked. But Caesar did not merely act. He calculated. He knew that in a world ruled by perception, the self was the ultimate currency. So he transformed, again and again, from high priest of Jupiter to military commander, from orator to author, from populist reformer to demigod. Every new version of Caesar killed the previous one, not with shame, but with precision. In Gaul, he turned slaughter into legend. He dictated his commentaries on the Gallic War in the third person, sculpting his exploits into history's marble. The audience was Rome. He was writing the myth in real time. And when he returned from the front, after crossing the Rubicon and defying the Senate, he did not crawl back as a loyal son. He returned as a reborn king in all but name. He staged grand triumphs, draped himself in purple, seated himself above the Senate, accepted honors not granted even to gods. He even had a golden statue made with the inscription, "To the unconquerable God." But power is a jealous flame, and Caesar, ever the performer, pushed the illusion too far. In the final act of his life, he stood in the theater of Pompey, surrounded by senators, and as they drew their blades, he did not beg, he did not speak, he did not scream. According to legend, he covered his face with his toga. Even in death, he preserved the performance. The role was complete. The actor had become immortal. But the lesson remains. Caesar did not rise because he was born great. He rose because he knew how to create greatness. He sculpted a self so vivid, so powerful, that the world bent to it. He became more than a man. He became a mirror for ambition itself. And long after the blood had dried on the Senate floor, Rome continued to echo with the name he had chosen to become: Caesar. The garden trembles, the air shifts, the statue of Caesar cracks and collapses into dust, carried by a wind that smells of parchment and roses. A new path opens. Where the last was imperial and cold, this one glitters with color and wit. Perfume lingers in the air. Velvet drapes flutter over the hedges, and at the end of the path, a silver cane taps on marble. Our next figure smiles behind a painted mask. Oscar Wilde awaits. The Garden of Echoes transforms again. The marble fades. Columns vanish into ivy. In their place rise salons of glass, lamplight glowing soft through stained panes, casting colors on the mist. You pass mirrors in gilded frames, and each reflection is not your own. Your face changes. Lips curl into irony. Eyes sparkle with secrets. You begin to walk with a flourish. You are now in the path of the aesthete, and seated at the center of a mirrored garden, cigarette pinched delicately between two fingers, is a man with velvet gloves and a voice like perfume. Oscar Wilde. To call him a writer is to miss the point. To call him a playwright is to clip his wings. He was not merely a man of words. He was a man who made himself a living phrase. And that was the true masterpiece. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin, 1854, to a family that knew how to perform respectability. His mother wrote radical poetry under a pseudonym. His father, a prominent surgeon, entertained secrets and scandals in equal measure. The household was brilliant, bohemian, and sharp-edged. But even as a boy, Wilde understood what so many miss. Identity is costume. Society is theater. And if all the world's a stage, then you must choose your role, or risk being cast in someone else's. He chose beauty. He chose wit. He chose decadence. At Oxford, he cultivated not just knowledge, but a character. He wore his hair long, decorated his dorm with lilies and blue china, and quoted classical myths in perfect cadence. His lectures became events. His presence a kind of social sorcery. He once said, "One should either be a work of art or wear a work of art." Wilde chose both. But the performance was not vanity. It was strategy. The Victorian age was rigid, hypocritical, and bound by false virtue. Wilde sliced through it with satire. His tongue became his blade. He wrote plays like The Importance of Being Earnest, where characters wore masks of politeness while hiding deviant truths beneath. The audience laughed, not realizing they were the ones being dissected. But Wilde's genius was not just literary. He understood the power of persona, that if you can control how others see you, you control what they believe is real. He became Oscar Wilde, an invention, a legend, a dandy so precise, so dazzling that he no longer needed a stage. He was the stage. Crowds followed him not for his books, but for his manner, his walk, his look, his lines. He said, "I put all my genius into my life. I put only my talent into my work." But then came the fall. Oscar Wilde, for all his brilliance, played a dangerous game. He lived in a time when being oneself fully could be a crime. And he dared to love freely in an age of repression. His affair with Lord Alfred Douglas, son of the Marquess of Queensberry, turned personal rebellion into public spectacle. The father, outraged, accused Wilde of posing as a sodomite. Wilde sued him for libel, a move born of pride, not calculation. The trial that followed shattered Wilde's world. His performance, once adored, was now reinterpreted as deviance, his wit now mockery, his persona now threat. Society does not mind masks until it sees what lies beneath. He was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. His name became ash. The salons turned their backs. The newspapers stripped him bare. In prison, Wilde was not Wilde. He was prisoner C.3.3. But even in ruin, he turned pain into poetry. His De Profundis, a letter to his former lover, was not just an act of sorrow. It was a final transformation. He said, "Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground." He emerged from prison thinner, quieter, broken in health, but not in awareness. He now understood that to recreate oneself was not just an act of art, but of war. A war against judgment, conformity, and the lie of permanence. He died in exile, poor, forgotten, in a cheap Parisian hotel, beneath peeling wallpaper. His last words, "Either that wallpaper goes, or I do." But Wilde had already won the Oscar. Wilde, who died in that hotel, was not the same man born in Dublin. He had lived many lives, each one curated, styled, deliberate, each one a mirror designed to reflect not the world, but his refusal to be confined by it. Today he is not remembered as a prisoner. He is remembered as a myth, a man who made his very being a form of resistance, who turned himself into legend through irony, beauty, and pain. The lesson is clear. If you cannot change the world, then change how the world sees you. And in doing so, you change everything. The mirrored garden shatters like glass. Petals fall like confetti from above. The laughter fades. The path becomes quiet again. But not still. A different energy rises now. Not performance, not theater, but focus. Discipline, void. A wind howls from the east. The next path is cut from stone and silence. And at the end of it stands a man with 2 swords. And no fear of death. Miyamoto Musashi waits in the mist. The garden has grown quiet, where the path of Caesar rang with marble footsteps, and the corridor of Wilde glittered with mirrored elegance. This third trails is subdued, carved from gravel and mist, echoing not with sound but with absence. There are no grand statues here, no theatrical masks or rose-scented salons, only stone lanterns veiled in fog, bamboo rustling in a cold wind, and a bridge that leads into shadow. Beneath your feet, the earth feels alive but indifferent. You are no longer walking toward a man, but towards something elemental, something that cannot be destroyed because it does not cling to form. This is the domain of Miyamoto Musashi, warrior, wanderer, writer, strategist, and ghost. Born in a turbulent time and forged in battle, Musashi was not shaped by courts, salons, or social ambition. He did not sculpt his identity to seduce or to impress. He sculpted it to survive, and in doing so, he created not a persona but a myth, a man who outlived even his own reflection. Musashi was born around the year 1584, during Japan's chaotic Sengoku period, a time when civil war was not a matter of history, but a daily, ambient reality. The land was fragmented, power was held by the sword, and death followed not in weeks or years, but sometimes in hours. In this crucible of conflict, Musashi emerged not as a prodigy of courtly discipline, but as a raw force of will. His father was a martial artist, and from a young age, Musashi was introduced to the sword not as symbol or art form, but as truth. At the age of 13, he fought and won his first duel. A real one, not a game or display. He killed a grown man. There's no record of his thoughts afterward, no dramatic line, no confession of guilt or pride. What mattered was that he lived, and the other did not. This was the beginning of a path that would consume all others. Unlike Caesar, who rose through image and statecraft, or Wilde, who turned life into art, Musashi built his identity upon stripping everything away. Each victory in battle, each enemy who fell, was not a trophy. It was a step in the refinement of his form, not just as a swordsman, but as a human being. He became a ronin, a masterless samurai, not because he was abandoned, but because he chose to renounce the hierarchy of servitude. He refused the comfort of allegiance. He wandered the countryside, challenging other warriors, confronting schools of martial arts, entering duels with nothing but a wooden sword and an unshakable presence. He won, again and again, more than 60 documented duels, undefeated. But Musashi's true genius was not merely in combat. His deepest transformation was internal. He understood that to become invincible, you had to dissolve the ego, not inflate it. He studied calligraphy, painting, sculpture, poetry, and Zen. He learned that to defeat an enemy, you had to see beyond yourself. He slept in caves. He ate little. He had no fixed home, no family, no known lover. His only true companion was the way, the path of personal mastery. It was not fame he sought, but formlessness. The most famous duel of his life came in 1615 on a remote island called Ganryujima. His opponent, Sasaki Kojiro, was a master in his own right, famed for his elegant style and long blade. Musashi arrived late, disheveled, arriving by boat with a wooden oar he had carved into a sword during the journey. The duel was over in moments. One strike, Kojiro fell. Musashi bowed, returned to his boat, and vanished. The world would remember this as his most dramatic moment. But to Musashi, it was simply the next expression of his path. He continued to evolve. He stopped dueling. He stopped seeking opponents. He began to write. His final years were spent in meditation and reflection. And it was then, in solitude, that he composed his most lasting legacy, the Book of 5 Rings. This was no martial manual in the traditional sense. It was a distillation of strategy, awareness, and the annihilation of ego. In it, he wrote not as a warrior glorifying battle, but as a philosopher chronicling clarity. He spoke of seeing with both eyes, of observing the world as it truly is, without emotion or illusion. He wrote of the necessity of adaptation, of becoming like water, fire, wind, and void. His final teaching was the most mysterious, the Book of the Void. Here, Musashi wrote that the highest state of being was emptiness, not despair, but possibility. To reach this state was to transcend form, name, and even victory. And perhaps that was his final transformation. The man who once defined himself through combat, who built his legend through skill and defiance, ultimately chose to vanish into nothingness. He died in 1645, sitting upright in meditation, as if still watching, still observing, still within the way. No court mourned him, no empire collapsed, but his teachings endured, his legend whispered on. Because Musashi had understood the deepest truth of all. Recreating yourself is not always an act of addition. Sometimes it is the discipline of subtraction, of removing masks, removing ego, removing identity until only essence remains. He did not perform the self, he escaped it, and in doing so became something rare, a man who by surrendering every role became larger than any role could contain. The lesson is this: not every reinvention must be loud, not every mask is theatrical. Sometimes the greatest power lies in refusing all costumes, in becoming nothing, and therefore becoming everything. The wind stills, the stones cool, the fog lifts, the garden of echoes grows quiet once more. The 3 paths have been walked, the 3 selves revealed. The stage now clears, and the mirror turns toward you. Power, in its rawest form, is not control over others. It is control over yourself, over the way you are seen, the way you are interpreted, and the way you evolve. The deepest victories are not won with the sword or the pen, but with the act of self-forging, the decision to become something new, something more, or as Musashi taught, something less, and therefore something vast. As you walk back through the garden of echoes, a strange truth begins to emerge. Julius Caesar, Oscar Wilde, and Miyamoto Musashi could not have been more different. One ruled with legions and marble, one dazzled with salons and wit, one wandered through fog and silence, And yet, they each understood the same principle, that identity is not fixed, and that the person who remains static is already in the process of decay. They did not discover who they were. They decided who they would become. And in this lies the most powerful secret of Law 25. The world wants you to remain predictable. It finds comfort in your labels: employee, citizen, spouse, artist, servant, rebel. The roles it gives you are not meant to free you. They are meant to trap you, gently, elegantly, until you no longer resist. Once you wear the same face long enough, people stop looking behind it. And slowly, so do you. This is how the majority die, long before death claims them. Embalmed not in tombs, but in habit. Caesar knew this from the start. Born into fading nobility, then we should have accepted his role as a bureaucrat, a soldier, a senator among senators. But he chose to overwrite the script. He manipulated appearance, forged spectacle, and even turned defeat into performance. When others sought to uphold the Republic, he invented himself as its end, and in that destruction built something greater. His self was not a mask, it was a blueprint. Every gesture, robe, title, and inscription was a piece of that architecture. Wilde approached it differently. His rebellion was not built on conquest, but on aesthetic defiance. He exposed the absurdity of Victorian morality by exaggerating it, twisting it, and wearing it with flamboyant irony. He created a persona so stylized that it became art in itself, a living satire, an elegant act of resistance. His identity was his weapon, and he wielded it with laughter as sharp as any blade, and yet, in the end, the very mask that liberated him became a target. But even then, especially then, Wilde wrote his final self into the pages of sorrow and truth. Musashi, the most elusive of the three, taught the paradox of reinvention through removal. He did not perform, he did not seduce, he vanished. Every mask he shed brought him closer to formlessness. And it was in that void that he found unshakable power. He reminds us that recreating yourself does not always mean adding layers. Sometimes it means destroying them, letting go of attachment, becoming the wind, the stone, the emptiness between things. Together, these three men give us the trinity of reinvention. From Caesar, strategic performance, crafting a self so deliberate that it commands loyalty, awe, and submission. From Wilde, aesthetic rebellion, using identity as a provocation, a seduction, a mirror held up to the world's hypocrisy. From Musashi, spiritual dissolution, transcending identity altogether until your presence cannot be attacked because it cannot be grasped. These are not merely historical curiosities. They are psychological tools, and in your life, whether in business, love, war, or silence, you will be asked again and again to choose between remaining the same or stepping into something terrifying, change. But reinvention is not merely about improvement. It is not a productivity hack or a motivational slogan. It is a radical act, a declaration that you will not be defined by your past, your origin, your trauma, or your reputation. It is a refusal to be simplified. To recreate yourself is to play God with your own flesh, not in arrogance, but in artistry, and you must be willing to suffer for it, to lose friends, to shed identities, to walk away from the mirror and rebuild it, shard by shard, until the reflection stares back with new eyes. Most will never do this. Most will cling to who they've been, because it is easier to die than to change. But power does not lie in ease. It lies in shape-shifting. And the Garden of Echoes, filled with whispers of old selves and ancient masks, exists to remind you of this. The world cannot trap what it cannot name. The enemy cannot destroy what it cannot find. And you cannot be stopped if you are willing to become new. The garden, once majestic, now feels different. The flowers here are overgrown, their petals torn. The mirrors along the path no longer reflect truth, but distortion. Some are shattered, some swirl with fog. Statues with half-formed faces reach from ivy with hands that never fully learned how to let go. This is the part of the garden that is rarely spoken of. The burial ground of failed reinvention. Because not all transformations lead to power. Some lead to madness. Law 25 is a dangerous gift. To recreate yourself is to seize the chisel of identity and begin carving your own form from raw marble. But not every hand is steady. Not every sculptor is patient. Some strike too hard, chasing fantasy instead of mastery. Others refuse to stop striking, reshaping endlessly until nothing real remains. There is a fine line between strategy and self-deception, between the persona that commands the world and the illusion that collapses beneath it. Let us descend into 3 such shadows. The first shadow, Napoleon III, the ghost in his uncle's cloak. In the mid-19th century, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, nephew of the legendary Napoleon I, returned to France not as a soldier, but as a ghost, draped in borrowed glory. He styled himself as the reincarnation of his uncle. Same name, same ambitions, same mythic gestures. But while the first Napoleon carved himself from brilliance, danger, and ambition, the second built himself from nostalgia. He used the past as a costume instead of a compass. He recreated himself not from inner force but from external memory, hoping that the glow of legend would shield his mediocrity. And for a time, it worked. He became Emperor of France, held salons, commissioned grandeur, but he was not his uncle. He lacked the vision, the command, the ruthlessness. And when real crisis came, when the Prussians stormed the gates, his illusion shattered. The mask broke. France collapsed. Napoleon III fled into exile. The danger, when you recreate yourself in the image of another, you become a shadow. And shadows fade quickly in firelight. The second shadow, Elizabeth Holmes, the voice that wasn't hers. In the early 2000s, Elizabeth Holmes emerged in Silicon Valley as a figure shrouded in black turtlenecks, speaking in a strangely deep voice, eyes fixed and unblinking. She promised to revolutionize medicine with her company, Theranos. She spoke with the cadence of Steve Jobs, dressed like him, quoted him, moved like him. She wasn't selling just a product. She was selling a persona. But while Jobs had spent decades at the bleeding edge of design and systems thinking, Holmes skipped the substance and kept only the skin. The technology didn't work. The reinvention was hollow. The deep voice wasn't even her own. It was a performance, meticulously rehearsed. And when the scrutiny arrived, her identity collapsed like a paper temple. The self she had sculpted could not hold up under truth. It was not a new self. It was an act built on borrowed traits. The danger, if the self you build is only costume, without discipline, without truth, then you are not reborn. You are simply pretending, and all masks rot eventually. The third shadow, Nero, the emperor who performed while Rome burned. Perhaps no figure in history embodies the descent into delusional self-reinvention like Nero, emperor of Rome. At first he played the role he was given. young ruler, heir of Augustus, student of Stoicism. But soon the performance consumed him. He believed himself an artist, a poet, a god. He staged performances where senators were forced to applaud his lyre concerts. He danced on stage while executions were carried out in his name. When Rome caught fire, stories spread that Nero watched from a balcony, singing in costume, strumming his harp. His identity was no longer a tool. It was a prison. He had reinvented himself so completely into fiction that he could no longer distinguish between reality and role. And when the people rose against him, he was shocked. The actor had forgotten he was mortal. He took his own life, whispering the line, "What an artist dies in me." The danger, when reinvention becomes theater without purpose, without reflection, it mutates into delusion. You may forget what you are. And when the audience leaves, so do you. There's always a risk in recreating yourself. But power has never belonged to the riskless. To master this law, you must walk a thin blade between creation and collapse, between vision and vanity, between truth and trickery. Reinvention must always serve clarity, never escape, never ego. The Caesar who rewrote power did so with strategy. The Wilde who sculpted self did so with art. The Musashi who dissolved identity did so with discipline. The ones who fail are those who imitate without understanding, who wear masks they have not earned, who build castles from air and mistake the applause for permanence. So as you leave this part of the garden, remember, the most dangerous illusion is not the one others believe. It's the one you do. You are the garden. The wind has slowed, the mist has thinned, and the garden of echoes begins to vanish, leaf by leaf, as if it were never truly a place, but a state of mind. You've walked its 3 paths. You've heard the footsteps of emperors, the laughter of fallen poets, the silence of sword saints. You've seen what it means to become something more than flesh, to turn yourself into myth, weapon, ghost. But now, at the very end, the garden offers one last gift, a mirror. It does not flatter you. It does not distort. It waits. And in its surface, what you see is not the person you were yesterday, not the child molded by parents, nor the worker shaped by rules, nor the lover who bent to be accepted. You see something unfinished, something dangerous, something possible, a canvas. That is what you've always been. The world tried to carve you into shape, tried to fix your name, bind your personality, tell you what is authentic. But authenticity, when clung to too tightly, becomes a prison. You are not a single truth. You are not a brand. You are not your past. You are echoes, waiting to be arranged. And you alone must decide which ones to silence and which ones to amplify. That is the essence of this law. To recreate yourself is not to lie. It is to rise. It is to claim authorship over your soul, to write your name in wet stone and dare the storm to wash it away. Those who fear transformation will call you fake. Those who worship stability will call you dangerous. Let them. You are not made to be seen. You are made to be remembered. So take up the mask and carve it, or set it down and vanish. But never stay still. The garden of echoes never stops growing, and neither should you. Like, subscribe, comment, or don't. You are the master of your own life.